Welcome to the Continuous Delivery Podcast. My name is Zarar.
I'm Csaba.
And joining us today is a very special guest. I think it's the first guest we've actually had on the show now that we've started to actually invite guests over. And it's Jason Little, who needs no introduction in the Agile community. He is a lean change management guru, if there's I think that's the right word to use here. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, so you have a preview book coming out. I'm saying preview book because I purchased it yesterday and I finished it today.
Yeah.
And it's not terribly long because you have another longer edition of this book coming out later in the year. But this one is called, and get ready for the name here. There's a lot going on in this name, Csaba. Are you ready for this? It's called The 6 Big Ideas of Adaptive Organizations, from Frameworks to Sense Making. I mean, that itself is a 4-part, TV series here on HBO. Just the title right there. Yeah. But let me start off, Jason, just by getting right into it. And I think in this book that you sort of, the first thing that struck me is that you reference some change management models, and you sort of critique them as saying they're always of this like linear flow. Communicate change, adapt change, whatever. And you sort of take issues with that. And instead of calling them steps, which are supposed to be executed in a linear way, you sort of call them focus areas. Can you talk about the difference between viewing those steps of the traditional change management model from a linear point of view and from a focus areas point of view, which is what you are proposing?
Yeah. It's because there's things that you need to pay attention to, but they don't have to follow that same order. The typical model is somebody up here dreams up some change at the top and they drop it through the hole in the floor to the organization, and the change people go, okay, well, I'll go lock myself away in a broom closet for 6 months and create some assessments and some plans and do some surveys and write some newsletters and blah, 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 blah. Oh, everybody resisted the change. It didn't work. And we just keep repeating that same pattern over and over again. So when you talk about are people ready for change in the traditional world, we do a change readiness assessment and we analyze it. And I always ask people, so what do you do if people aren't ready? Well, we just do it anyway because we already have the budget. Well, then why the hell are you doing it? It's just like we follow these steps and these check boxes, and then we wonder why it doesn't work. So our view is that the process of aligning people, or getting buy-in, as it's called in the traditional world, which I don't think makes any sense because we're not selling used cars, is aligning people towards a purpose is something that we're always working on. We don't do it at the beginning and we never look at it again. We're always checking to see, what have we tried over the last week, 2 weeks, month, whatever it is? What did we learn? How should we pivot? Or how should we pursue? Or maybe we should stop. So the focus areas is just, these are things that you should pay attention to, but you don't do them in order and just think once you finish the step, you're done. You got to keep going.
So is it sort of like, are you proposing more of an iterative approach to change management? Because iteration, I know you take issue in your book with the word transformation, which I totally agree with. But I also sometimes take issue with the word iteration because it's sometimes used as an excuse to kind of punt the real change forward. So could you just talk through about, or should we think of it as an iterative approach, or how should we think about it? Because you mentioned focus areas, but is it like, are people ready? No, they're not. Let's try next month to see if they're ready. Like, just contrast that to the iterative change management approach.
Okay. So yeah, when Ken and I chat about not liking that transformation word, it's because we notice the pattern seems to be, we talk that language, mindset, behaviors, beliefs, values, transformation, but we behave in a way that shows we just want process optimization. So that's why we're not really fans of that phrase. And iterative, yes, always, but it's not so much. We did actually, Ken and I just chatted about this. We put a video up on LinkedIn about this exact topic. People want to take lean change and they go, okay, how do I do the steps for alignment or buy-in or an iterative approach using your framework instead of the one I'm using? And it's like comparing apples to carburetors. It doesn't make any sense. So it's not, we tried some things, we're just going to punt the change down. It's, if this week our goal was to see where people's brains are at with the change, if they're ready for it. If they're not, why? So what's stopping people? Could be other priorities in the organization. It could be nobody really understands what it is. It could be everybody has better ideas than what the change is that's been dropped into the organization. So we want to learn from that. And our next iteration is now, well, maybe that's not the change we should be doing. Maybe we should be focused on something that's different instead. Same way you would do this in software, right? You put out a feature, and once customers start using it, they're like, nah, I don't really like that, or I didn't need that, or can you move that button over there, or can you do this? And we iterate on it.
Jason, it's interesting because like I've been in many organizations, and actually I'm with an organization that recently went through a change. And in that organization, one of the change models were used. It doesn't matter which one. We all know the linearity is pretty much again present. One thing which I would like to get your view on these focus areas, and I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to read your paper or your book, but what kind of role in your view the leadership plays, especially vis-a-vis this readiness in this change?
It depends. I think sometimes we get too hung up on leaders have to be there daily supporting the change and be actively involved. I mean, it sounds nice. It looks nice in a slide, but I find in the real world, as long as they're not opposed to it, they don't not care, but they don't care either, right? Like they're trusting you as the change person to do what you were brought in to do. And they don't want to be surprised or be the last people to know when stuff changes. But it's almost like if they're against the change, it's never going to happen no matter what. If they don't actively support it, it doesn't matter as much depending on the change, because it's the people who have to live with the consequences day in and day out. Those are the people who are going to make or break the change, not whether or not the leader is showing up at the transformation meeting every couple of weeks, because they just want it to get done, right?
Jason, like I've even like in recent experience, I've never found the leaders to be opposed to the change, but as soon as they start understanding the consequences of that change, and it sort of comes a little bit late to them, just because once the change starts happening, it's always at the bottom floor where you start feeling some of the impacts, and then when that impact gets bubbled up to the leadership level, then they're like, oh, I wanted change, but I wanted change my way. Yeah. I had done this in organization X before. This is what I intended to change, but now it's Y, and I'm very uncomfortable with that. That's the situation where I think as agile coaches, we often find ourselves in. Is that, oh my God, now the person who started the change initiative has to change themselves. What, like in your book, what can readers kind of get out of, like, what can they learn about dealing with situations like those when there are unintended side effects for the leader who initiated the change?
Yeah, there's always going to be. The 5 universals of change is the one in the book that specifically talks about this. So it's around having conversations about how do we flip our thinking about the old way of doing change and the new way. So one of the core concepts in traditional change is create urgency, right? Which very quickly moves into coercion and fear, as in, I put this on your scorecard, thou shalt do this change. And what do you think people are going to do? They're going to do whatever they're managed to do, or performance managed to do. So instead of that, we want to flip away from urgency, fear, coercion to purpose, which is a lot more difficult. So that's one example. Meaningful dialogue over broadcasting. What we typically call change communications really is broadcasting, right? Like we've decided everything, we've crafted the message. It's usually filled with a bunch of stuff that doesn't really matter to people. I'll say that in a nice way. And we blast it out, just like plunking a kid in front of a TV set, and we want to flip towards meaningful dialogue. And an example, one of the companies in the Nordics that I did some work with, their CEO did 30, 40 people roundtables once a week. I can't help if I don't know what's going on. So for the first like 3 months, just went through the entire enterprise company, ran these things every week to collect insights and pulled out from people. What are the challenges? This is what we want to do. What are the obstacles to do it? And how do we address those? Like that's like, there's a chasm of difference between that than sending out a newsletter and telling people the why, which you can't, I don't know. I don't know if you guys feel the same, but suppose I came in and said, this is why you should stop using StreamYard. You should start using this instead because it's better and it does this, that, and the other. You're going to be like, shut up. You know, you can't tell people why something is important to them. They have to explore that through dialogue. So the 5 universals definitely speaks to leaders to help them understand what's different if we choose to do change this way as opposed to the old way. And it's always a choice. It's never a you should.
So Jason, like I totally agree with you when you talk about the senior leadership, but there is this layer which you probably heard about. It's called frozen layer, or probably other people call it a frozen layer, right? And in this kind of middle management, this change sometimes is very, very threatening because so 2 aspects, right? Whether we acknowledge it or not, or we like it or not, there is these people learned how to game the system, but not because they are bad, just because the nature of the system. They learned how to play in this kind of middle man, which is a very, very sad sometimes and very, very like unrewarding place to be, because you don't really have too much power to affect stuff. In the same time, you depend on other people to get stuff done, right? So they are stuck kind of in this middle. Now this change comes in where and especially like in agility, when we are start putting autonomy and more agency towards people, these folks in the middle should shift more towards a servant leadership model. Now these are very, very nice words. I could do a quick poll here. What percentage have you seen these middle managements just, oh yeah, servant leadership, cool, let's do that. So there is this So there is this very, very heavy resistance. And when I ask about leadership, maybe I wasn't specific enough. I'm asking about this entire swath of people who has to move in unison or has to be somewhat aligned. And this is what I found, at least I'm not sure, Zarar or Jason, what you found. This is where I found one of the biggest, and I don't want to say it's resistance, because the resistance would think that these people do it on purpose. They sometimes do it subconsciously. They sometimes do it just feels. And you're probably familiar with David Rock's scarf model, right? So it's kind of like speaks to and for the listeners, kind of threat. So people's threats kind of turn on, right? So scarf is status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness, right? So all these get impacted. And so that's why I wanted to ask you, like how do you see, or in your book, do you address this very specific group of people who usually one of the biggest impacts, they have the biggest impact on these changes?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so sort of the engine room of change, like
Yep.
I like to call it.
Yeah. We there's a little snippet which is a preview for the bigger book that we talk about the movers, the movables, and the immovables. That even in that frozen middle, you're going to have a handful of people who are the movers. Those are the ones that they get it and they want to do it. Typically, that's where I'll spend my focus and energy, helping, supporting those folks so they can run amok in the organization and shake things up. And most of the time, some of their peers come along, but not everybody. So the movables tend to want social proof. So especially when you start talking about enterprises, especially when you talk about insurance, telecom, finance, there's usually a lot of cruft built up in the culture, and those systems are put in place to maintain stability. So there's a lot of escape velocity we're going to need to do to get out of that gravitational pull that keeps pulling them back into the old way of doing things. So that's why they stay frozen. And there's a whole pile of reasons that could be: how the change comes to be in the first place, how people are performance managed to get the change done. all of those things factor in. The 5 levers, which is one of the 6 big ideas, speaks directly to how to deal with that. And then the movers, movables, and immovables talks about the people dynamics that you're going to run into. I was actually chatting with a company about this, where most of the people on the teams, from their view, were movers. They were supportive. They wanted to take action. They wanted to improve things. But they had one highly influential person who was dragging the team back. So you've got that dynamic to worry about too, right? Like the manager who's been there forever and knows everybody. They're going to be the most influential. And if they don't support it, I mean, it's going to be a lot harder. But yeah, what you see on screen is exactly what I was describing. You know, when we're in that middle circle and we value standards, that's how we do change. Standards leads to stability. But unfortunately, we get obedience. We get followers because we want control, leads to more conformity, leads to egocentric leadership styles, and we just spiral in that gravitational circle. And now we come along and we say, we need to be adaptable. We need self-management. We need to create purpose and switch our culture. You can't jump from the middle to the outer. And I think there's a lot of disjointedness with agile transformations where coaches take what the organization wants to do literally. I'm hiring you to help us transform. Great. I'm coming in with my adaptable mindset, and I'm just going to whack you over the head with the agile stick till you submit. But we might have to just move from standards to goals first.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can't make the leap to the outer circle. We basically want to use this model to help organizations be congruent.
Yeah.
So if you're in that situation, you know, there's nothing wrong with process optimization, but let's be congruent about it. If that's all we can do right now, let's just do that first and see how it goes, and not talk about transformation and all these deeper things.
I want to move on to the next topic, but I want to just focus on this, the vortex of behavioral patterns. So if you're listening on audio, check out the video. I'll post this in the comment section as well, in the show notes as well, I should say. Is that you talk about this, like, I think you're a Star Trek person.
Star Wars.
Star Wars. Okay.
Ken would get very upset, especially if you saw his background.
You talk about an escape velocity,
yeah,
on how people are generally glued or very there's an affinity towards following standards because frankly, like, those standards have proven to be effective business drivers for them. You know, it's kind of hard for somebody to say, hey, you gave the StreamYard example. Hey, StreamYard's working for me. Why should I change? I think the similar thing probably happens in organizations where you go, oh, you need to be more ambitious. Well, I mean, my stock price is 180 and increased by 30% over the last 4 years. What are you talking about?
Yep.
So how do you, like, what are some of the things that a coach maybe should consider when they encounter resistance from that inner circle? Or maybe resistance is the wrong word, maybe you can correct me. Is that when your organizational goal or your leader's goal is for your team to be more ambitious, to capture more of the market, but you run into these standard stability things that have proven to work as a coach? Now, speak from a coach's point of view, not necessarily what is your reaction to encountering, like, how should a coach respond when their goal is to elevate the organization, but they're encountering, let's say, hey, we can't deploy every 3 weeks because the standard says do this?
Yeah, that's where a facilitator stance, I think, helps. So we can have the teams or the people who have to live with those day-to-day consequences in the room, talking with the change sponsors, stakeholders, whatever you want to call them, leaders, so we can align on what it is that we want to do. There's no other way to do it. There's no magic way that will get the leaders who are asking for this to understand what it is till the teams start doing it. So, I think our goal is to provoke those conversations, which are going to be much more difficult, sooner, so we can be congruent about what we want to do, right?
Okay, so let's move on to the next topic, and we have about 10 minutes left or so. You also talk in your book/pamphlet, this tension between evolution and optimization.
Yep.
And how people tend to confuse the two, or they're not clear when they think they're evolving, but they're really optimizing. And sometimes I personally have found, like people, we go to organization and we do something good. And in my view, I'm like, yeah, well, this is a small thing we optimize, but it's received as, oh my God, like, look at us. We're now using, we're deploying every 2 weeks. Ooh, la, la. You know what I mean? To me, it's optimization, but to somebody else, it's like a big thing. How do you see the two things? You do say in the book that you do find some confusion between the two. Define both terms for us and sort of tell us what comes first. Like, give your take on those two terms, which you spoke a lot about there.
Yep. So the way Ken describes it is vertical versus horizontal growth. So optimization is horizontal growth. We want to do the same things we do now, just faster. And vertical growth or evolution is we want to change how we do those things. And we need both. Especially when we talk about, using transformation language and stuff like that, and behaviors and mindsets and all these things, we need a little bit of both. Optimization is a good thing, but optimization on its own is we're just doing the same things faster. So once we can start to figure out how to evolve on a higher plane, then we can start to talk about beliefs and behaviors and deeper system level concepts and things like that. And the intention of this model is to get a conversation going again around congruence. Let's be clear about what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Let's not fill people with a bunch of buzzwords about behaviors and beliefs and mindset and all the stuff if that's not what we're ready to do. Because you can make some great improvements with optimization, like you mentioned, right? Like if we release every 6 months and now we can release every 2 weeks, like that's huge. Doesn't mean we've evolved to a higher plane. So organizations become adaptive when they pay attention to both.
So
Evolution
Jason, is this
plus optimization is adaptability?
Yeah, sorry. So Jason, are you proposing this kind of model to make sure that we differentiate, or we have this kind of different way of thinking, because we know that by optimization we will always going to hit a certain limit, and you need to have a different paradigm. Like my example, always I say, let's not try to improve the candle, let's buy a light bulb, right? Yeah. So because as long as we are still focusing on improving the candle, we can get so far with that unless we start thinking. Is that where you are kind of trying to highlight and okay.
Exactly. Yep.
Nice. So yeah, this one was. I mean, so if you're listening, the book has a bunch of models which you can use. I'm just picking 2 or 3 just to talk through them, but definitely check it out. It's on Amazon. I just got the Kindle edition with 1 click. Very easy read. I love the way it's written. It's not coming from a highbrow position. It's written in very simple language which anybody can understand, and it's useful. So highly recommend the book by Jason. And Ken. Sorry, yeah, I keep forgetting the other guy. But I do want to just talk about one more thing here, and I can't share this because of technology constraints. But I kind of want to talk about one model you have there is the 5 levers of change.
Yep.
And you talk about people, strategy, structures, processes, and technologies. So we're called the Continuous Delivery Podcast, and a lot of the times we focus on the technology aspect of things, and I know continuous delivery is much bigger than that. But one of the things that we often talk about is sort of like, if you can in your head point an arrow towards the technology aspect to the other aspects. What we often say here is that if your technology delivery speed is high and you are able to experiment at high rates, so I'm talking deploying 5-6 times a day, taking a user story from concept to production within 2 days, that itself can drive a lot of the other changes that you talk about, like organizational change, psychological safety, basically the DORA model stuff. Are your thoughts on how kind of like deployment speed and lean cycle time, those metrics, can they help drive some of the other stuff that you're talking about in the book?
Yes, absolutely. The purpose of the 5 levers is we generally will pull the technology and process levers, number one, because they're the easiest and they're the most visible. and we ignore sometimes the consequences that it will have in the other three. So if we start from process and technology, or even just technology, but we ignore the rest, we're going to magnify problems in those 3 or 4 other levers very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So the intention of that model is so you can, number one, have conversations about what is on and off the table, and to try to understand what else in your system is going to be affected by doing this. And a perfect example is an organization I worked with where they were your typical hierarchy: development group, testing group, operations group, blah, 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 blah. Wanted to move from 18-month delivery cycles to 6 months, and then from 6 months to 3 months. So in order to do that, obviously there's a lot of technology that needs to be done. So implementing a CD pipeline, basically the operations team got oversaturated with too many teams requesting stuff. So optimization, great. They hit their limit. What they did instead of moving to evolution, because they pulled on that lever, was they now locked everything down and made it harder for teams to deploy because they didn't have the capacity. But that's the system telling you your operations team shouldn't exist anymore. They should, those functions should be merged into the teams. Now we got to talk about structure. Now we got to talk about strategy, right? So we created all these problems in the organization, and they chose to say, nope, we want no part of this, because we'd have to reorg, we'd have to do all these other things, and we're not capable of doing that right now. So they stuck in optimization.
So Dora is often being, like, we love Dora. Csaba and I, we got the Dora tattoos, and but sometimes it's sort of being, it gets critiqued for being too technical of a metric. It's too software centric to measure something, because it might hide a lot of things, and that's true. It can, but it does, as you say, kind of takes a pile driver through your organization and really tests like where the waste is or where the inefficiencies are, and then you can do something about it. But it comes from a lens of really technology and software deployments and so on. Can you guide us on some other areas, other tests that you can do in an organization that sort of speak to where the waste is or where the inefficiencies are? Dora's kind of like we've almost come to the point where, for me, like Dora's like when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, like Dora, Dora. Like, can you sort of expand our minds a little bit and say, what else should we be thinking about besides Dora to kind of tease out these organizational inefficiencies?
I like to separate diagnostics from measurements, and we need both, and they should never be static. They should evolve over time. So we can deploy every 2 days. Great. What if you're deploying the wrong thing faster and not doing anything about it? That's an example. Pirate metrics is great. If your organization is capable of doing feature toggling or feature tracking or something that is giving you data about how fast you're releasing, is it making a dent in what customers are doing? So all these things are interconnected with each other, I think. But they should never be static. Like, diagnostics are things that say, yes, we're still marching north, which is good. And sometimes we'll go off the path a little bit, but the diagnostics are trying to help us make sure that we know where true north is. And the measurements are things we know when we got there. But again, when we talk about the 5 levers, if those measurements are put in place by performance management, then you're going to have a problem, because people are always going to hit that number no matter what. You get what you measure, right? Like what Deming said. So I like separating them into those categories and using, escape defects and sprints is a great one. Don't track bugs, don't track defects, none of that stuff. Only track things reported by your customers. And don't worry about if it's a bug or a feature request. There is an unmet need that exists, and that matters more than, I never track in-process defects ever, because the feature's not done till it works the way it was supposed to, right? So it's a combination of stuff. You have to find, depending on what the culture values, if they value stability and standards and stuff, they're probably going to have more individual measurements for all the teams and departments, and those are difficult to change. But diagnostics and measurements tends to shift the conversation towards something that's more useful.
I just want to, I'm glad you said that, because one of the things I always tell teams is that your customers create defects, not your teammates.
Yeah.
So let's not bombard Jira with the red dots everywhere because you found something on day 4 of the sprint.
Yeah,
Csaba?
I just got rid of a feature. The startup I'm working for, I'm building their platform, and I got rid of a feature. And within a couple of hours, I got a chat bot popped up and goes, "How do I do this thing again? The button's not there anymore." I'm like, "Well, nobody used it, so we pulled it out."
So
Csaba? Yeah.
one thing, Jason, that I was listening to you guys, and again, just going through these transformations. What I noticed this pattern of in people's behaviors, a little bit of like how to describe this. The organization goes with this inertia, right? That they kind of go, and what I found is that culture is something which is very, very like we can't really put our fingers on it, but we can still feel it, right? And we talk about beliefs and behavior and then all this stuff, right? But underneath there's something very fundamental, which I would call competencies. And I always contrast this, that yes, you can switch from waterfall to agile, but your developer will not learn, let's say, solid or design principles or encapsulation if they were not doing it overnight, or how to write a good unit test, how to pull out. So refactoring, we can go on and on these technical practices, which are very, very, very key to be able to slice down and then start delivering these kind of smaller pieces and smaller experiments. So kind of like supporting those needs that arise very quickly, rapid experimentation and so on and so forth, right? So what do you do in organizations where, due to historical, because they just released, to your point, your organization, 18 months, developers have all the time to do this, they have the testers, they rely on them, and so on and so forth. So how do you tackle this competency? I don't want to say competency problem. It's just complacency to a certain extent, and just being in a place for a long time, and this inertia, this kind of, I don't know, competency inertia, if you wish, for lack of a better word. How do you tackle this? Because what I found, and I'm curious what's your opinion, this is another thing, another anchor that's going to hold you down to be able to start accomplishing those goals that you hope to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah. I've seen that in plenty of organizations, and I don't know if you remember the good old days when Agile was actually about software and extreme programming, and then all of a sudden all these process coaches came in and said, "You should be unit testing." They're like, "We don't know how to do that." Oh, go read this blog post, right? Like the player coach is something that's needed. So one of the things that we would do in organizations, like the Lean Into It folks, is we always had a well-rounded coaching team. So we always had, people who could work in the organizational layer, the management layer, and the technical layer. And we would do things like, bring us your ugliest piece of code and we're going to mob program for an hour. We advocated for pairing, which some organizations don't like because you've got two people working on one task. So depending on how the performance management and all that other stuff works, but pairing works very well. Showing possibilities is another, because I find in those cases, they can learn that stuff pretty easily. They've never needed to because the system didn't need it. Problems were always somebody else's department. It was either the QA's department or operations problem that they had to deal with these things, not us as the development team. So there's a whole pile of different ways to deal with that. Merge the three, put the development team closer to the customer. Some organizations I've worked in, the budgets were the problem because it was too hard to trace back what department requested this feature. And when that feature didn't work right, somebody had to pay to get that thing fixed, and they could never figure that out. So they just wouldn't bother to do it. We would visualize their testing infrastructure on a big visible wall, like number of tests created over time, which obviously is not a great metric, but it's a good starting point for people who have no tests. So a really good model to understand how to make that shift is BJ Fogg's behavioral model, where he talks about motivation and ability. Which one of those are you going to trigger? So if it's something that's really hard to do, the change is not likely to happen. And really hard to do could mean a bunch of things. It could mean really bad legacy code base. Could be we don't have any technical infrastructure to do any of this type of stuff. They won't let us pair those things. But I find once you show possibilities, like I showed one of the worst situations I ever saw was people were emailing binary files back and forth. They didn't even have source control, which was nuts. And I was sitting with the development manager because we were working on some ungodly complicated data in and out application with a gazillion combinations. And I just showed him how to create some simple automated tests. And he was like, what witchcraft is this? They've never been exposed to it because the system didn't need it. And once they see it, they're like, holy cow, we're going to do this. And then they start. So show possibilities.
Okay, Jason, I think, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of the player coach. I'm glad you phrased it that way, because that's sort of, I've always tried to be that. Not always done it well, but tried to do that. So the book is called The 6 Big Ideas. It's on the screen, of adaptive organizations from frameworks to sense making. Ken Rickard and Jason Little. Jason, tell us when the larger text is coming out, and tell us where people can find you.
Sure. Probably the fall. We started working on it last fall. And then the more we got the 6 big ideas in front of people at conferences and stuff, they were just like, please do something to give us these ideas and write about it. So we just ripped that stuff out and put this short guide out pretty quickly. So we're aiming for the fall to have the big one out. This one actually debuted at #1 in the business mentoring and coaching Amazon list. So woohoo! It's definitely a book that you should get. And you can find me and Ken at leanchange.org.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jason. Hopefully we can get you back when the big text comes out, or even before that. Even it's been great talking to you, and certainly. Do you have a Twitter or anything you can? Are you on Twitter, or are you active there?
Yes. At Jason Little.
Are you putting you on the spot here?
I don't use it as much, just because of the noise, but I'm not hard to find. Or go to agilecoach.ca, and that's where you can find me and all my socials and stuff like that. And maybe we can do like an in-person talk show or something like that, because we're all in Toronto, right?
Well, absolutely. We used to do this in person before COVID, and then moved to online. So definitely,
yeah, that'd be cool.
We got $500 worth of equipment sitting behind me.
Yeah.
So, listener, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon. Our next guest will be Paul Henman, who will talk about his Kanban journey over the last couple of weeks. We hope to air that in a week or so. Look forward to that. Jason, thank you again for joining us, and listener, goodbye.